So if you want to dominate an industry like any industry, really, the standard advice you get is almost always exactly the same.
Right. Run faster, yell louder.
Exactly. Yell louder or, shine brighter than the person standing right next to you. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a blueprint from a global icon who basically looked at the greatest, loudest, brightest talents of her entire generation and just decided to win by getting quieter.
Quieter, deeper, and just absolutely refusing to compete on their terms.
Yeah. We are unpacking this really fascinating analytical document today. It's titled The Toni Braxton Blueprint, Why She Was Different.
It's such a great source text.
It really is. And the central mission of our deep dive today is to deconstruct the exact, sonic, visual, and emotional elements that allowed her to become entirely unmistakable in what was arguably the most crowded, golden era of elite women artists.
Oh, absolutely. The 90s.
Right. So we're looking at a masterclass in artistic branding and emotional resonance. And to you listening, I want you to imagine stepping into a room filled with the most elite, powerful voices in the world and wondering, how do you make sure you are the one they remember?
Which, that requires a fundamental misunderstanding, or rather, a reevaluation of what actually captures human attention.
How so?
Well, we often assume that the biggest spectacle wins, right? But the source material we are examining today frames her career not as, like, a typical biography of chart-topping hits. It treats it as a highly deliberate psychological strategy.
A psychological strategy. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, the underlying thesis here is that her unparalleled success wasn't derived from trying to outdo her peers musically. I mean, it wasn't an arms race of vocal acrobatics.
No, not at all.
She approached the music from a completely different angle. She relied on a really deeply specialized set of differentiators.
So before we even get into, the lyrics she was singing or the dresses she was wearing, which we will get to, we really have to start with the literal physical phenomenon of her voice.
The instrument itself.
Exactly, because the notes here explicitly highlight her, quote, deep contralto voice. And the text paints a picture of a female R&B space that was, at that time, just overwhelmingly dominated by what it calls brighter vocals.
Right, the industry standard.
Yeah, and I want to pause on that contrast, because if you think about the vocal landscape of the early to mid-90s, it was essentially an orchestra where everybody was fighting to be, the soaring, bright violin.
Or maybe the piercing, triumphant trumpet.
Yes. They wanted to be the instrument that cuts through the very top of the audio mix. And into that specific environment walks Toni Braxton, functioning like a rich, resonant cello.
I love that. The cello comparison perfectly illustrates the acoustic reality of what was actually happening on the radio back then.
Because it wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was physics.
Exactly. The prevailing wisdom for a female pop or R&B vocalist at that time was all about brightness and height. Record executives were actively looking for artists who could live in the upper registers.
Why was that the standard?
Well, those high frequencies are literally designed to stimulate the human nervous system. Like, they thrill us. They demand awe.
Right. You hear a massive high note and you get chills.
Exactly. But a contralto register, which is the lowest female singing voice, it operates on a completely different acoustic frequency.
Yeah.
It's characterized by a heavy, dark, incredibly rich timbre.
Okay.
And lower frequencies are processed by the listener in a fundamentally different way.
I want to dig into that physical processing for a second.
Mm-hmm.
In an industry where the mandate from the top down is belted out into the stratosphere,
Yeah.
why is a deeper voice so jarringly effective?
It's a great question.
Why didn't a lower register just get swallowed up by the heavy R&B production or lost in the background mix?
It really comes down to how resonance works within the human body. High, bright vocals, those soaring violins you mentioned, they are often experienced in the head.
Okay.
They are a cerebral thrill. But lower frequencies, they ground the listener. They literally physically resonate in your chest cavity.
Wow.
So when you hear a rich contralto, it creates an immediate visceral sense of intimacy and gravity. You don't feel like you are standing in a massive stadium watching someone perform on a distant stage.
It's closer.
Much closer. The auditory illusion of a low frequency makes it feel like someone is sitting in a quiet, dimly lit room speaking directly into your ear.
So it completely changes the environment of the listener.
Completely. And you have to understand, to deviate from that bright, high-flying standard was a massive commercial risk at the time.
Oh, I'm sure. Labels hate risk.
They are notoriously risk-averse. If a specific type of vocal acrobatic is selling tens of millions of records, the immediate reaction of every label is to just clone that sound, right?
Right. Give me the next one of those.
Exactly. So finding someone who inherently lacks that extreme upper register agility, but possesses this dark, heavy bottom end, and then deciding to make that the focal point of a major marketing push, that was an incredibly contrarian move.
But the payoff for that contrarian move is an instant, unmistakable sonic identity.
Yes.
Because as a consumer, your ear gets trained by the radio. Like if you listen to a pop station for an hour, your brain starts passively anticipating what the next track will sound like.
It builds a pattern.
Right. So when your ear expects a high trill or a bright crescendo, and instead it receives this remarkably low, smooth, heavily textured phrase, it acts as a pattern interrupt.
That's the perfect term for it.
You are jolted out of your passive listening state.
A pattern interrupt forces active engagement. The sonic texture fundamentally shifts, and the listener just has to lean in.
Yeah.
The source is essentially outlining how her voice didn't just sound aesthetically different. It functioned uniquely within the commercial marketplace. It commanded attention through warmth and resonance rather than through sheer volume.
Or piercing pitch. I want you, the listener, to think about the voices that capture your attention in daily life. Imagine you are in a chaotic, crowded boardroom, or like a really loud restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Is the voice that commands the room the highest, most frantic, loudest one? Usually that just adds to the noise, you know?
Right, you tune it out.
Exactly. The voice that makes everyone stop talking and pay attention is almost always the calm, deep, steady register.
There is an inherent authority in depth.
Yes. But having a unique instrument is really only half the battle. You have to know how to play it.
And that shifts us from the sonic signature to the emotional currency, right?
Right, because the source material drops this incredible definitive statement. I love this line. It says, Toni didn't outsing everyone, she outfelt everyone.
Which is just a staggering claim to make about a singer operating in the vocal powerhouse era of the 1990s.
I actually want to push back on the mechanics of that claim for a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
If we are analyzing an era of R&B that absolutely worshipped incredible vocal acrobatics, an era where the ultimate metric of talent was like how many notes you could squeeze into a single breathless run.
The melisma era.
Right, the melisma era.
Yeah.
How does a singer actually win by pulling back? Like, how do you dominate an era obsessed with out-singing by actively choosing not to play that game?
Well, to answer that, we really have to parse the fundamental difference between singing as a technical exercise and feeling as an emotional delivery.
Okay.
In the 90s, those vocal gymnastics, the massive range, the sustained high notes, they were the dominant currency. And look, they require immense, undeniable technical skill.
Unbelievable skill.
But technical perfection can actually, inadvertently, act as a barrier to empathy.
Oh, interesting. It makes me think of watching two different types of actors on screen.
Tell me.
You have one actor delivering this massive, screaming, crying, vein-popping monologue, and they're giving you all the technique they learned in drama school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impressive.
Very impressive. You watch and go, wow, they're acting.
Exactly. But then the camera cuts to the other actor, who is completely silent. They just stare ahead, their jaw tightens a fraction of an inch, and a single tear falls.
Oh, yeah.
And somehow, that quiet actor is the one who completely shatters you. Like they take your breath away without making a sound.
That analogy perfectly isolates the difference. Because when an artist is perfectly executing a flawless 5-octave run, the listener is often just marveling at the performance itself.
Right.
The internal monologue of the listener is, wow, what an incredible singer. They are observing the talent from a distance.
Like watching a gymnast stick a landing.
Exactly. It's athletic. But when an artist prioritizes phrasing, breath control, maybe a slight waver in the voice, the raw vulnerability of a specific lyric, they bypass the listener's admiration and they connect directly with their empathy.
Oh, that's such a good point.
You stop marveling at the singer's technique and you start reflecting on your own life. You think about your own heartbreak.
You are no longer observing the emotion. You're inside of it.
Yes. The document suggests she used that deep contralto to deliver lines with such conviction and such restrained ache that the emotion felt entirely lived in.
Right.
She wasn't showing off what her vocal cords could do. She was exposing what the lyrics meant.
Which connects directly to another crucial observation in these notes. The fact that she, quote, sounded mature from day one.
That is such a key phrase in this blueprint.
It jumped out to me because it breaks one of the most entrenched rules of the music industry. I mean, there is a very standardized narrative arc for artists, particularly young women.
Oh, the machine has it down to a science.
Totally. You launch as the fresh-faced teen pop star singing about crushes or high school dances.
Right.
Then, a few albums later, you have the heavily publicized, sometimes super awkward coming-of-age era.
The transitional phase.
Yes, where the sound gets a bit darker, the image gets edgier, and they explicitly announce to the world that they're transitioning into an adult contemporary.
The public evolution from child star to adult artist is practically a mandatory rite of passage in pop music. It provides a really easy, consumable marketing narrative for the labels.
But the notes are highlighting that she entirely skipped that adolescence phase. She didn't have a, finding herself era in the public eye.
No, she really didn't.
She bypassed the entire transitional narrative and arrived fully formed as an adult.
And that phenomenon is incredibly rare because it requires a specific alignment of physical vocal tone and artistic maturity.
Right, you can't fake it.
To arrive fully formed, sounding mature from day one, meant she absolutely could not sing about trivial, youthful infatuations.
It wouldn't work.
Her voice, carrying that heavy, resonant contralto weight, it demanded adult themes. She was interpreting complex, devastating, grown-up concepts.
It's like deep betrayal.
Deep betrayal, long-term heartbreak, the nuances of adult relationships. And because she possessed that specific vocal texture, she had the inherent gravitas to make the audience believe she had actually lived through these profound experiences.
Even on her debut record. Yeah. Exactly.
She sounded like she had a mortgage and a complex divorce behind her the very first time she stepped up to a microphone.
That is hilarious, but it's so true.
It's true. It would cause complete cognitive dissonance to hear that voice sing, like a bubblegum pop track. The physical sound mandated the maturity of the material.
And that maturity cultivated a highly specific, fiercely loyal demographic. It appealed to adults who recognized the complicated reality of their own emotional lives reflected in her phrasing.
Right.
She offered an emotional currency, like a shared vulnerability, that you simply couldn't extract from a technically flawless, emotionally sterile performance.
So for everyone listening, reflect on your own media consumption for a second. What art do you actually return to year after year?
That's a great exercise.
Whether it's a song, a film, a novel, do you consistently return to the thing that is technically flawless, perfectly executed, but maybe a little cold?
Usually not. Right. Or are you drawn back to the art that feels incredibly human, slightly frayed around the edges, and emotionally raw? We almost always choose the feeling over the technique.
Every time.
But, sounding mature and feeling deeply is really only the audio portion of the blueprint. In the music industry, the visual representation of the music is the packaging that sells the product.
Oh, the visual branding had to be a seamless extension of the audio. It had to be.
Right, because if an artist possesses a deep, mature contralto but steps onto the red carpet in, neon, chaotic teen pop attire,
the resulting friction destroys the illusion. The visual must confirm what the audio is promising.
So let's look at how she dressed to sell that reality. The source material outlines her visual and thematic blueprint with a really specific set of descriptors. It says, sophisticated, grown, vulnerable.
Such a powerful combination.
And then it uses this incredibly striking phrase to describe her aesthetic. It calls her sexy without forcing sexuality.
That is a masterclass in positioning.
And the text specifically points out that she was aggressively avoiding two major archetypes of the era. She was not the girl next door, and she was not aggressive hip-hop soul.
Right. The genius of this branding lies in its absolute restraint. Let's actually deconstruct that trifecta from the notes. Sophisticated, grown, vulnerable.
Let's do it.
Sophisticated implies a high level of elegance, curation, and polish. Grown implies life experience, internal confidence, and a sense of self-possession that just doesn't require outside validation.
She didn't need you to like her.
Exactly. And then vulnerable is the emotional hook that prevents the sophistication from feeling cold or arrogant.
Oh, that's the balance right there.
When you fuse those three elements, you create an image that is inherently alluring, but that never resorts to desperation to capture attention.
It makes me think of architectural minimalism.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you have a beautiful, sleek, unadorned room, the lack of clutter actually draws more attention to the high quality of the material.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a quiet confidence. Whereas a room packed floor to ceiling with loud decorations is desperate for you to look at everything all at once.
Right, it's begging for your attention.
So in an industry that relies heavily on overt provocation to sell albums, visual restraint is actually a much louder, more disruptive statement.
The restraint itself functions as a magnet. It's the difference between demanding an audience look at you versus simply existing in a way that makes it impossible for them to look away.
Wow, yes.
And the text highlights exactly what she was contrasting this against. She completely bypassed the girl next door archetype.
Right, which was huge at the time.
Huge, but that lane is built on accessibility. It's safe, it's innocent, it's unthreatening. It's the artist positioned as your relatable friend.
The ultimate accessible pop star.
Correct. But this blueprint we're discussing, it was not about being a peer. It was about projecting an aspirational maturity.
So she's not your peer.
No. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, she also avoided the aggressive hip-hop soul branding.
Which was also massive.
Very massive. But that aesthetic was gritty, street smart, raw, and very, very direct in its presentation. By avoiding both of those massive trends, she carved out a totally unique third path.
She wasn't the innocent, relatable teen, and she wasn't the street-smart soul singer. She emerged as this polished, incredibly elegant, almost untouchable figure.
Untouchable, but emotional.
Yes. And here is where the friction is so brilliant. Her voice was actively breaking your heart with its vulnerability. But her fashion choices, the impeccably tailored suits, the iconic short haircut, the elegant, minimalist evening gowns, they functioned as a type of armor.
Armor is the perfect word for it.
Because if she had looked as raw and as wounded as she sounded on those records, it might have been like too chaotic for the audience to process.
It would just be too much vulnerability. It overwhelms the listener.
Right. But presenting this impossibly poised, controlled, grown exterior while delivering lyrics about devastating internal collapse, it created a tension that was incredibly magnetic.
It's a fascinating contrast.
She looks like she has the entire world perfectly under control, but she sounds like her internal world is completely falling apart.
That tension is the core of the brand. And it highlights a massive hurdle for modern artists attempting to replicate this blueprint today.
What's the hurdle?
Projecting a genuinely grown image requires an internal gravity that you just cannot manufacture in a boardroom.
Ah, yeah?
A record label can secure the most expensive gowns, they can hire the most sophisticated stylists in the world. But if the artist doesn't inherently possess that lived-in maturity, the audience detects the inauthenticity immediately.
It looks like a child playing dress-up in their mother's closet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The visual sophistication of this blueprint only worked because her voice and her emotional intelligence had already convinced the listener that she had earned it.
Right. So the blueprint is flawlessly cohesive. The contralto voice, the emotional phrasing, the sophisticated minimalist image, they are all reinforcing the exact same narrative.
It's brilliant synergy.
But to truly understand the sheer magnitude of what this blueprint achieved, we have to look at the battlefield she was walking onto. We have to really map out the territory of the 1990s music industry.
Because a strategy can only be evaluated against the environment in which it is deployed. And the 90s were an unforgiving, hyper-competitive landscape for vocalists.
Unbelievable. The text describes the timing of her arrival as a, quote, golden age of women. And it drops a roster of peers that is just staggering to look at.
Let's hear it.
Mary J. Blige, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Brandy, Monica, Aaliyah.
Wow.
That is not just a list of popular singers. That is the ultimate R&B and pop Hall of Fame. These are cultural titans.
Absolute icons.
Imagine the boardroom conversations trying to launch a new artist when the market is already completely saturated with absolute legends dominating the charts, right alongside a rapidly rising wave of superstar youth talent.
It would have been terrifying for an executive. The oxygen in the room was entirely consumed by these specific women.
Completely.
But this is where analyzing the ecosystem proves why the blueprint was so effective. We can map out the psychological real estate that was already claimed by those peers.
Let's dissect the market share. Okay, so if you look at Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, they firmly occupy the brighter vocals territory the text mentioned earlier.
Oh, without a doubt.
They are the soaring, stratospheric vocal acrobats. They own the highest registers, the biggest choruses, the triumphant global pop R&B crossover anthems.
They offer the listener a sense of absolute awe and triumph.
Yeah.
You do not step onto a stage and try to outsing Whitney or Mariah in their own lane. It is an unwinnable war of attrition.
Right, you will lose.
Yeah.
Okay, so the soaring triumph lane is taken. Then you look at Mary J. Blige.
The queen of hip-hop soul.
Exactly. She undisputed owns the aggressive hip-hop soul lane. She brought the street edge, the heavy hip-hop production, and an incredibly gritty, deeply relatable pain.
She offered the listener solidarity in the struggle. You cannot manufacture a street-smart persona to outraw Mary J. Blige.
The authenticity of that lane was fully occupied.
Totally locked down.
And then we look at the younger wave. Brandy, Monica, Aaliyah. They represent the cutting-edge evolution of the girl next door archetype, infused with innovative 90s production.
Right, they had the youth demographic entirely locked down. They provided the soundtrack for adolescent discovery, the high school experience, that fresh-faced, relatable edge.
So when you map it out like that, it looks like a completely closed ecosystem. The high-altitude triumph is taken, the gritty street reality is taken, the relatable youth experience is taken.
There's nowhere left to go.
Right. The sheer elite level of this competition would normally force a new artist to either create a cheap imitation of one of those reigning champions and pray to pick up their scraps.
Which rarely works.
Never works.
No.
Or to find a completely vacant piece of real estate.
And she located the negative space. She looked at that golden age and realized there was a specific, highly lucrative emotional demographic that was being completely underserved.
Who was that?
Well, Whitney and Mariah were soaring. Mary J. was speaking to the street. Brandy and Monica were speaking to the youth. But who is speaking to the sophisticated adult? The person sitting in their living room late at night, maybe nursing a glass of wine, dealing with a complex, devastating, quiet heartbreak?
Who is providing the soundtrack for the unhurried grown experience?
That is exactly the gap she filled. She didn't try to squeeze into their lanes. She paved a brand new road. She introduced the contralto to ground the listener.
Yeah.
And she introduced the sophisticated, vulnerable, adult contemporary vibe to provide a mature emotional mirror.
This just proves that a saturated, crowded market doesn't mean there's no room left for you.
Not at all.
It just means you have to know exactly what specific unmet need you are capable of fulfilling, and you have to execute it with absolute precision. Don't be a slightly different version of the giants.
Yeah.
Be an entirely different creature.
Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate test of any historical strategy, really.
Where do we go from here?
The source material pivots from the historical context right into modern implications. It poses a very specific debate.
Okay, let's hear the debate.
It asks, could Toni Braxton exist today? Or was she built perfectly for the 90s grown and sexy era?
Oh, I love that question.
And it also leaves us with a little breadcrumb regarding her lasting influence. It simply notes, later, Beyoncé.
That debate is fascinating because if the blueprint is so structurally flawless, the unique voice, the deep emotional resonance, the sophisticated visual armor, why wouldn't it translate seamlessly to 2026?
Right.
What were the specific conditions of that 90s grown and sexy era, and have those conditions evaporated?
Well, we have to define the ecosystem of the grown and sexy era first, based on the notes regarding maturity, slow burn emotion, and sophistication. This was a period in music that explicitly valued patience.
Patience. That's a rare word in music today.
Right. The cultural consumption of media back then allowed for slow, simmering ballads. It was an environment designed for adults, tackling adult themes with sensuality and emotional complexity.
And it didn't necessarily need to rely on explicit shock value, right?
Exactly. Or frantic, high DPM dance production to hold the listener's attention.
The pace of consumption was entirely different. It was unhurried. You bought an album, you sat down, and you listened to it. You lived with it.
You did. And so the debate over whether she could exist today really hinges on how drastically the mechanics of fame have changed.
Okay, lay out the case against her. Why wouldn't it work today?
The case against her blueprint working today argues that the current industry prioritizes extreme, constant relatability driven entirely by social media algorithms.
Oh, yeah, TikTok.
Right. The modern artist is expected to maintain a parasocial relationship with their audience. They are sharing every mundane detail of their life.
The requirement today is, like, messy authenticity. The audience wants to see the artist crying on TikTok in their sweatpants.
Exactly. So that impenetrable wall of sophisticated, grown elegance might be interpreted by a modern audience as too distant, too cold, or just unrelatable.
The modern consumer expects to feel like they are FaceTiming with their favorite singer.
Yeah. And furthermore, the sonic landscape has fractured. The algorithmic market often demands brighter, faster, highly aggressive beats with rapid-fire hooks.
Try to catch them in the first 3 seconds.
Right, designed to capture that microscopic attention span. So the slow, deep, unhurried, vulnerable ballad, which is the natural habitat of the contralto voice, it struggles to find algorithmic traction on modern playlists.
So the environment has become genuinely hostile to patients. But, I actually want to argue the other side of this debate.
Spirit.
Why could this blueprint still dominate today?
I think because human psychology doesn't upgrade as fast as technology.
Oh, that's good.
True emotional resonance is entirely timeless. The notes emphasized her ability to outfeel. The distribution methods have changed, yes, but we still experience deep, complex heartbreak.
Of course we do.
We still crave art that understands us on a visceral level, regardless of the BPM.
And think about the voice itself as a tool for disruption. If today's market is a wash of bright, fast, highly processed, auto-tuned, frantic vocals, a rich, dark, acoustic contralto would serve as the ultimate pattern interrupt all over again.
Yes, it would.
Just like it disrupted the soaring vocals of the 90s, it would disrupt the algorithmic franticness of 2026.
Exactly.
When everything is moving at warp speed and pitching higher, stepping to the microphone and delivering something slow, deep, and grounded becomes a revolutionary act.
True uniqueness will always slice through the noise. Always. And the source text subtly confirms the endurance of this blueprint by pointing to her lasting influence. That little note, later, Beyoncé.
Let's unpack that. On the surface, if you just glance at their catalogs, they might seem stylistically distinct. How does the architecture of the Toni Braxton blueprint connect to Beyoncé?
Well, if you analyze the evolution of Beyoncé's solo career, you see massive adoptions of that sophisticated, grown, vulnerable trifecta.
Right.
Consider Beyoncé's vocal approach on her most devastating, critically acclaimed ballads. She frequently dips into her lower, richer registers to convey serious emotional weight.
That's true.
She prioritizes the raw feeling and the phrasing over the high-note acrobatics, even though the entire world knows she possesses that upper range capability. She uses the depth to ground the emotion.
And from a branding perspective, Beyoncé absolutely commands that untouchable, highly curated, sophisticated elegance.
She really does.
She has aggressively rejected the messy authenticity of the social media era. She is not your relatable friend on TikTok. She operates on a level of majestic, grown curation.
The restraint is the brand.
Exactly. The restraint is the brand.
So the blueprint that Toni Braxton helped perfect, the alchemy of mixing undeniable visual sophistication with fierce vocal vulnerability and having the courage to lean into the emotional weight of a lower register, it proved to the next generation of elite artists that they didn't have to be the loudest or the highest to win.
They could command the culture through depth.
Through depth, gravitas, and strategic restraint.
Look at the fast-paced, highly accessible, constantly frantic media landscape we all live in today. Does it feel like there is still room for a creator, an artist, or a leader whose entire brand is built on mature, unhurried sophistication?
It's a tough question.
I think the answer is a resounding yes, but it requires a staggering amount of discipline. It requires the courage to not chase the frantic trend and to trust that your depth will eventually outlast the temporary noise of whatever is currently viral.
It is the ultimate exercise in trusting your own frequency, literally and figuratively.
To pull all these threads together, the Toni Braxton blueprint is a masterclass in the mechanics of differentiation. She walked into an industry saturated with absolute titans.
The biggest of the big.
Right, and rather than trying to play their game, she fundamentally changed the rules of engagement. She utilized the physics of a deep contralto voice to break the mold of the bright, soaring vocals of her era.
She constructed a sophisticated, mature visual armor rather than chasing trendy, youthful aesthetics.
And she cemented a timeless legacy by making the conscious, strategic choice to outfeel the competition rather than outsing them.
The overarching lesson here, and this is applicable far beyond just the music industry, is that true uniqueness isn't about being the loudest, the fastest, or the most constantly visible.
What is it about then?
It is about identifying the negative space in the market, understanding your precise strengths, and having the unwavering confidence to force the world to adjust to your frequency, rather than exhausting yourself trying to match theirs.
Forcing the world to adjust to your frequency. That is the perfect distillation of this entire deep dive. As we wrap up today, I want you, the listener, to think back to that imaginary room we discussed at the very beginning.
That room full of titans.
Right. That room filled with the elite, the powerful, the giants dominating your specific field or your world. When you look at those giants, are you burning yourself out trying to outsing them at their own game?
It's an exhausting game to play.
It really is. So, is it finally time to locate your own unique register, step back, and figure out exactly how to outfuel them instead?